The bench sat at the edge of Marion Square in Charleston, South Carolina. Old iron and worn wood, the kind of bench that has held 1,000 strangers and remembered none of them. The evening was settling in slowly, the way southern evenings do in late November. The sky bleeding from pale gold into a deep, bruised purple at the edges. Gas lamps along the square's perimeter flickered on one by one. The last of the day's tourists were pulling their jackets tighter and moving toward warm restaurants and lit hotel lobbies. And on that bench, so still she could have been mistaken for a shadow, sat a girl. She was 18 years old. Her name was Lena Harper. Her dusty rose dress was wrinkled from 3 days of living in it, the hem frayed where it had brushed against sidewalks and concrete. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. Her hands were folded in her lap with a stillness that was not peace. It was the particular, careful stillness of a person who has learned that drawing attention costs more than it returns. She did not hold a sign. She did not reach out a hand. She simply sat, her brown eyes watching the city flow past her the way a river watches the bank, present, quiet, and completely unacknowledged. Dozens of people walked past in the span of 20 minutes. A woman in heels glanced over and redirected her gaze to her phone. A man in a suit registered her for half a second and then adjusted his briefcase strap and kept walking. A young couple drifted by close enough to touch her and never once looked her way. The city of Charleston did not stop for an invisible girl on a cold bench. But the dog did not move. He was pressed firmly against her left leg, a medium-sized mixed breed with a coat the color of warm caramel and eyes so dark and steady they looked almost deliberate. His name was Ranger. He had no collar, no documented history, no papers that proved what he was. But anyone willing to watch him for more than 30 seconds would have seen it, the way his body angled slightly forward whenever a stranger passed too close, the way his ears rose and settled in slow, unhurried rhythm, tracking every movement in the square without a single twitch of alarm. The way he held his position beside Lena with the absolute, unshakable commitment of something that had made a decision and intended to honor it completely.
To Charleston, he was a stray. To Lena Harper, he was the only living thing in the world that had not left her. 3 days ago, her life had been small but stable, the kind of life built carefully from very little, where every dollar was accounted for and every plan mattered. She had been sitting at their kitchen table that night studying for her community college entrance exam, the yellow second-hand lamp casting its warm circle over her books, the apartment quiet and safe around her. Her mother, Carol, was at work, the overnight cleaning shift at a downtown office building, 6 nights a week, the job she had held for 4 years without complaint because it kept the lights on and kept Lena's future possible. At 11:18, the phone rang. Lena still remembered exactly how the screen looked lighting up in the dim kitchen. She remembered the stillness that moved through her body before she even answered, that wordless animal knowing that something has broken before you have been told. Cardiac episode, serious, stable for now, please come. She ran the 6 blocks to the hospital without stopping. She sat beside her mother's bed through the entire night, holding her hand, watching her breathe, speaking quietly to her even when her mother couldn't respond, telling her about the exam, about spring enrollment, about small, ordinary things, because ordinary things felt like anchors. When the sun came up, Lena kissed her mother's forehead and walked home. The landlord was already at the door. 3 months of missed payments, final notices that her mother had hidden in a kitchen drawer beneath old coupons and takeout menus, trying to protect Lena from the weight of it. There was no negotiation. There was no grace period. By noon, the locks had been changed, and Lena was standing on the sidewalk with a backpack containing 2 changes of clothes, a study guide she would never finish, and $4 left from the 23 she had started with. Ranger had been waiting at the bottom of the steps. He had shown up at their back door 8 months earlier, thin, muddy, with a small cut above his left eye and the cautious, watchful look of a creature that has survived long enough to be careful about trust. Carol had fed him from a bowl on the back step. Lena had cleaned the cut above his eye with gentle hands and spoken softly to him until his breathing slowed and his body relaxed. He had never left after that. He slept near the door. He walked Lena to the corner each morning. He waited. And now, when everything else was gone, he was still waiting. For 3 nights they had navigated the city together, once beneath the wide overhang of a closed bookshop where the concrete still held a ghost of warmth, once in a parking garage on the far side of the square, and last night on this bench. Lena had curled on her side with Ranger pressed against her stomach, his slow, steady heartbeat against her ribs the only thing that made the darkness feel survivable. When she had cried, silently, carefully, the way she had trained herself to cry so no one passing would hear, Ranger had lifted his heavy head and placed it in her lap with a gentleness so precise it felt intentional. Not frantic, not worried, just present, just there, as if staying was the only thing that had ever needed to be said. Across the square, near the old iron fountain, a man sat alone on a separate bench and watched the water move. He appeared to be in his early 60s, silver hair cut close, plain dark jacket, clean boots worn without vanity. His hands rested on his knees. His blue eyes moved across the square with the slow, unhurried patience of someone who had spent decades learning that the most important information rarely announces itself. His name was Nathan Cole. To anyone passing, he was simply an older man taking the evening air. The reality was something else entirely. Nathan had spent 23 years as an operator within the United States SEAL teams, moving through environments so dangerous that most people could not have imagined them, making decisions under pressures that dismantled lesser men, building inside himself a stillness that had become almost architectural in its solidity. After retiring, he had quietly built a private security consulting firm, now operating across 4 continents. By any measure, Nathan Cole was a man who had mastered the art of being unbreakable. But 3 weeks ago, something had broken anyway. His business partner of 11 years, a man he had trusted not with contracts alone, but with the quiet, rare confidence that combat veterans extend to very few people in civilian life, had been systematically betraying him for 2 years, siphoning funds, selling client intelligence, smiling across the conference table every single week while doing it. The legal process was moving, the damage was contained, but the wound, the specific, private wound of misplaced trust, had not closed. Nathan didn't speak about it. He had no framework for speaking about it. So he came here instead, to this square, because stillness had always been where he did his clearest thinking. And because he was still, he saw her. He noticed Ranger first, the subtle repositioning of the dog's body when a jogger passed too close to the bench, the way his gaze moved and settled, not frantically, but with a focused, experienced calm that Nathan recognized in his bones. He had seen that quality in men he'd trusted his life to, that specific composure that only develops when an animal or a person has learned through genuine hardship that panic serves no one. He watched for a long time. He watched Lena's hands stay folded and still. He watched her tilt her face down toward Ranger once, barely perceptibly, and watched the dog press his nose against her knee in response, a brief, wordless exchange that contained more honest communication than most conversations Nathan had sat through in the past decade. He was still watching when she stood up. She smoothed her dress with both hands. She straightened her shoulders. Then she walked across the square toward him, not rushing, not hesitating, with a quiet directness that had nothing performative about it.
She stopped a respectful distance from his bench. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was steady, but Nathan heard what was underneath the steadiness, the way you hear tension in a bridge cable that is carrying more than it was built for. "I'm sorry to bother you. Do you know of anywhere nearby that might be safe for someone to sleep tonight?"
Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Sit down," he said quietly. "Please." She sat. Ranger moved immediately to the space between them and studied Nathan with calm, careful eyes for several seconds before settling, which Nathan understood instinctively was the dog's version of provisional trust. He almost smiled. "What's his name?" Nathan asked. "Ranger." Nathan looked at the dog. Ranger looked steadily back. "Good name," Nathan said, and he meant it. He asked her gently what had happened. Lena told him, not rushing, not performing distress, but speaking with the plain and measured honesty of someone who has already passed through the worst of the shock and arrived at the bare, true shape of their situation. Her mother in the hospital, the apartment gone, 3 nights outside, Ranger beside her through all of it. When she finished, the square was quiet around them for a moment. Then Nathan said, almost without deciding to, "I know something about what it feels like when someone you completely trusted chooses to betray you." Lena turned and looked at him carefully, not with pity, with recognition. "Are you all right?" she asked. It was such a simple question. He had been asked it dozens of times in the past 3 weeks by colleagues and lawyers and well-meaning associates, and each time he had answered without hesitation, "Fine, moving forward, under control." This time, the words didn't come. "Not entirely," he said. "No." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, she asked, "Would you like me to pray for you?" Lena looked at him. This 18-year-old girl, sitting on a cold bench with $4 and a dog and nowhere to sleep, was offering to pray for him. "Yes," he said, "I would." She closed her eyes. Ranger lowered himself slowly onto the ground and rested his chin on his front paws. The fountain murmured behind them. Somewhere in the oaks above, a bird settled into stillness. "Dear God," Lena began, her voice just above silence, "please help this man. He looks strong on the outside, but I think he's carrying something heavy inside. Please give him some peace tonight. And please watch over my mama in that hospital room. Bring her home to me. And thank you for Ranger. Thank you for not letting him leave me." The square held itself quietly around that prayer. Nathan had stood at grave sites and not broken. He had sat in field hospitals and kept his face composed. He had built interior walls of considerable and deliberate strength over 62 years of living hard. But this girl's prayer, offered freely for a stranger before she breathed a single word for herself, stripped of any bitterness that would have been entirely understandable, walked through every one of those walls as if they were made of smoke. He breathed slowly. He looked at the fountain. He did not trust himself to speak for a long moment. Then he stood. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Both of you." He found them a room at a quiet inn 2 blocks from the square, calling ahead to confirm Ranger was welcome before they walked through the door. He arranged for food. He called a patient advocate he knew personally to check on Carol Harper's care. He called a colleague who ran transitional housing for young adults and set the necessary things in motion, methodically, thoroughly, without announcement, and without making Lena feel reduced by any of it. When Lena came out of the bathroom an hour later, her hair washed, her clean clothes on, the 3 days of sidewalk and cold and invisible suffering rinsed away, Nathan looked up from the corner chair where he had been sitting quietly. He went completely still. The girl who had been unseen by an entire city was gone. Standing in the warm lamplight was a young woman of quiet, extraordinary grace, her posture straight, her eyes clear, a light in her face that hardship had buried, but never, not once, managed to extinguish. It had been there the whole time, waiting. Ranger stood beside her and wagged his tail in long, slow, joyful arcs. And Lena smiled, not politely, not gratefully, fully, the kind of smile that takes over a person's entire face when something deep inside them finally exhales. Nathan looked at her, then at the dog, then at the lamplight falling warm across the room.
He thought of what his old commander had told him once after a mission that had not gone as planned but had still brought everyone home. The most important work is always the work no one briefed you on. He had never understood it as completely as he did in this moment. Some battles leave no record, no citation, no entry in any file. They happen in quiet squares at dusk, between a girl who never stopped being dignified and a man who finally stopped walking past something that mattered, with a dog sitting between them as a witness to the fact that loyalty, when it is real, does not require a reason. Carol Harper recovered. Slowly, over months, but she recovered. Lena enrolled in her college courses that spring. She moved into transitional housing, then a small apartment of her own the following year. Ranger received a proper collar and a warm bed and a name tag that Lena chose with great care. It read, Ranger, Family. That's all. Because some things need no further explanation. And Nathan Cole, a man who had survived wars and built empires and carried betrayal in silence for 3 long weeks, found something on a bench in Marion Square that none of those things had ever given him. The quiet, unshakable knowledge that he had not walked past something that mattered. That, in the end, is the only kind of peace that lasts. If this story reached something inside you, if it reminded you that loyalty and compassion are never wasted, no matter how quietly they are given, please subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts right now. Every single subscriber tells us that these stories deserve to be told. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if this story reminded you of a person, a veteran, or a dog who never gave up on someone they loved, leave their name in the comments below. We read every one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having a heart that still knows how to feel. The value this story carries. This story teaches us that dignity is an internal truth, not an external condition. Lena had almost nothing, yet she never lost her grace or her compassion for a stranger. It shows us that true loyalty, as Ranger demonstrated without a single word, is among the most powerful forces a living creature can offer another. It reminds veterans and older viewers that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. Nathan's quiet admission that he was not entirely all right was its own form of courage. It challenges every one of us to examine how many times we have walked past something that mattered because we were simply too busy to look. And finally, it affirms that the most important missions of our lives will rarely be the ones we planned. They will be the ones that find us on an ordinary evening, on a cold bench, in a city that forgot to stop.